Imagine the scene. It's the middle of the night. Over Ukraine, unmanned aircraft cut through the darkness, diving towards cities with deadly intent. Far away, inside Iran, secured research centers hum quietly as foreign experts move through laboratories the West has tried to penetrate for years. These two moments, separated by continents, are connected by a secretive arrangement so risky that intelligence officials fear it could tilt global power and revive nuclear dangers unseen since the Cold War era. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This is unfolding now, and its consequences are deeply alarming. In September 2024, U.S. saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken stepped in front of cameras in London with a message that stunned security analysts worldwide. Russia, he said, wasn't merely purchasing drones from Iran. Instead, Moscow was compensating Tehran with something far more sensitive than money or weapons: advanced nuclear knowledge. The kind of expertise that could dramatically accelerate Iran's nuclear ambitions. The kind of information that governments spend decades trying to protect. In return, Russia secured a steady flow of weapons needed to sustain its war in Ukraine. It was a calculated exchange, one that placed global stability at serious risk. To understand how this moment came to be, we need to look at both sides of the deal. One nation squeezed by sanctions and battlefield losses. Another driven by long-standing ambitions and international isolation. Together, they found common ground in the most dangerous trade imaginable. This is the origin of what analysts now quietly refer to as the Plutonium deal. Ukraine is where the consequences are most visible. Over time, the skies there have turned into a constant threat zone. Iranian-designed Shahed drones have become a central tool in Russia's campaign. By 2025, Ukrainian defenses were facing close to 100 of these drones every night. That's 100 airborne threats targeting power grids, hospitals, residential areas, night after night. The damage isn't only physical. The psychological strain on civilians and defenders alike has been relentless. Technologically, these drones are simple. The Shahed 136 is not cutting-edge aviation. It's essentially an explosive platform with wings, but its strength lies in cost and volume. It's cheap to produce, hard to ignore, and effective at draining air defense systems. For Russia, struggling under sanctions and limited manufacturing capacity, these drones offered a practical solution. For Iran, they became leverage that would soon be used to demand something far more valuable than cash. What began as an arms purchase soon evolved into something deeper. By late 2023 and early 2024, Moscow and Tehran moved beyond shipments and into joint production. Iranian firm Sahara Thunder partnered with Russia's Alabuga JSC to manufacture drones inside Russia itself. This wasn't about resupply anymore. It was about permanence, creating an industrial system capable of sustaining warfare long term. The scale of this operation is hard to overstate. The Alabuga facility transformed into a major drone production hub. By September 2025, it was producing more than 5,500 drones every single month, reaching projected targets far ahead of schedule. These weren't emergency numbers. This was mass production, designed to last for years. What makes this cooperation unprecedented is how deeply integrated it became. Iranian engineers didn't just ship designs, they worked directly alongside Russian technicians. Knowledge flowed freely, problems were solved jointly. The result was a hybrid system blending Iranian drone expertise with Russian industrial capacity. This was no longer a supplier relationship. It was a fusion of military-industrial systems under sanctions, producing weapons at a pace that threatened to reshape the conflict. As the partnership matured, the drones themselves improved. Early versions were basic, vulnerable to jamming and interception. Newer variants showed better navigation, longer range, and more destructive payloads. Ukrainian air defense units began noticing behavioral changes, different flight paths, altered response patterns, greater resistance to countermeasures. These drones were evolving, and that evolution was driven by close technical collaboration. Then came the next escalation. In September 2024, intelligence agencies confirmed that Iran had begun transferring ballistic missiles to Russia. These included Fatbach 360 systems, short-range but precise. Russian troops were trained inside Iran to operate them. This marked a serious deepening of cooperation and a direct enhancement of Russia's strike capabilities. Sanctions followed, warnings were issued, but the transfers continued. The missile cooperation revealed how far this alliance had gone. Training Russian personnel in Iran meant sharing not just equipment, but operational knowledge, maintenance, deployment, tactical use. At the same time, Iranian instructors gained insight from Russia's battlefield experience in Ukraine. Lessons learned in real combat were flowing back into Iran's military planning, shaping future strategies. For Russia, these missiles filled a critical gap. Years of intense warfare had depleted its stockpile of precision weapons. Sanctions slowed replacement. Iranian systems, while less advanced, were accurate enough and available in sufficient numbers. They allowed Russia to maintain pressure while its own industries struggled to recover. But all of this, drones, missiles, factories, was only the surface. The most dangerous aspect of the relationship was happening quietly, beyond public view. Behind closed doors, Russia was sharing nuclear expertise with Iran, and that is where the stakes become truly global. When U.S. intelligence agencies warned that Russia was expanding its transfer of nuclear, missile, and space-related technology to Iran, they weren't talking about manuals or diagrams. They meant deep technical knowledge, fuel processing, enrichment efficiency, weapons physics, testing methods, and delivery integration. This is the foundation of a functional nuclear weapons program. Uranium enrichment is the key barrier in nuclear development. Turning natural uranium into weapons-grade material requires advanced centrifuges, precise engineering, and years of trial and error. Many countries fail at this stage. Others take decades to succeed. External expertise can shorten that timeline dramatically. That's why Russian assistance matters, and why intelligence agencies are so alarmed. Iran has pursued uranium enrichment for many years and has undeniably moved forward. Facilities like Natanz and Fordo now operate thousands of centrifuges around the clock. But progress has never been smooth. Centrifuges fail. Entire cascades become unusable due to contamination. Output efficiency often falls short of what physics allows. In nuclear development, even small efficiency gains matter. A single percentage point improvement can significantly shorten the time needed to produce usable fissile material, and less time means a faster path toward a potential weapon. If Russian experts, who have decades of experience running some of the most advanced enrichment systems on Earth, are advising Iranian engineers, Iran could dramatically boost output without expanding facilities or adding new machines. Yet enrichment alone does not create a nuclear weapon. Turning enriched material into a functioning device is an entirely separate challenge and just as complex. Weaponization demands precise engineering at an extreme level. A nuclear device must compress its fissile core evenly and instantaneously. That requires perfectly shaped explosive lenses, flawless timing, and specialized initiators that release neutrons at the exact right moment. Designers must solve problems involving heat, radiation, pressure, and microsecond-level synchronization. Historically, nations struggled with these issues for years, often relying on costly trial and error testing to succeed. Russia has already mastered these challenges. Over decades, it has produced thousands of nuclear warheads, evolving from early crude designs into highly advanced modern systems. This experience represents an unmatched body of knowledge. If Russian weapons scientists are sharing even fragments of this expertise with Iranian counterparts, Iran could bypass years, possibly decades, of failed experiments and technical dead ends. They would gain insight into what works, what doesn't, and how to avoid the mistakes every nuclear weapons program has faced. That kind of guidance could radically accelerate Iran's progress. By mid-2024, Western intelligence agencies began tracking Iranian nuclear officials traveling to Russian institutions directly linked to atomic weapons research. These trips were not symbolic. They were working engagements. Iranian specialists discussed acquisition of dual-use equipment, materials that can serve civilian reactors, but also military programs. They examined construction methods, safety systems, and testing protocols. This was precisely the type of knowledge the international community has spent decades trying to keep out of Iranian hands. The locations involved make this even more concerning. Some visits reportedly included facilities with roots stretching back to the Soviet nuclear program. One of them, the Russian Federal Nuclear Center in Sarov, once known as Arzamas-16, was where the Soviet Union developed its first atomic bomb. Institutions like this hold generational expertise passed down since the birth of the nuclear age. Access to such centers means access to some of the deepest nuclear knowledge on the planet. For years, Iran's nuclear effort has operated under intense pressure. Sanctions restricted equipment, sabotage slowed progress, cyber operations destroyed centrifuges, key scientists were assassinated. Iran's engineers were forced to work in isolation, often rebuilding technologies other countries perfected decades ago. Despite determination and heavy investment, progress was uneven and costly. Now that isolation appears to be ending. Russian specialists are reportedly sharing insights drawn from one of the most advanced nuclear programs ever created. The learning curve for Iran has sharply steepened. Timelines that once stretched far into the future may now be measured in years instead of decades. This represents a fundamental change in Iran's nuclear trajectory, from a struggling, constrained program to one supported by world-class expertise. And the cooperation extends beyond weapons knowledge. Russia and Iran have signed a deal reportedly worth around $25 billion to construct the Hormuz nuclear power plant. Officially, this is a civilian energy project. But in nuclear technology, civilian and military applications are inseparable. The same enrichment processes that fuel reactors can produce weapons-grade material. The same engineers who design reactor cores understand chain reactions essential to bombs. The same supply networks can serve both peaceful and military goals. Russia has agreed to help build as many as 8 nuclear power plants in Iran. That means training thousands of Iranian engineers. establishing supply chains for nuclear materials and developing advanced manufacturing capabilities. Russia understands the implications. This is not accidental. Moscow knows it is strengthening Iran's long-term nuclear capacity, but accepts the risk because it needs Iranian weapons and political alignment. This type of cooperation creates what experts call a latent nuclear capability. Iran doesn't need to build a bomb today to benefit. It can expand civilian infrastructure, educate specialists, and stockpile experience, while remaining technically compliant with international treaties. If the decision to weaponize is ever made, the foundation would already exist. Russian involvement significantly reinforces this strategic hedge. To fully understand why this deal exists, we need to look at Russia's position. Moscow is operating under one of the harshest sanctions regimes ever imposed. Its military industry is under strain after years of war in Ukraine. Precision weapon stockpiles are depleted. Manufacturing capacity is constrained. Traditional arms suppliers are unwilling or unable to help. China remains cautious, wary of secondary sanctions. North Korea provides ammunition, but lacks advanced drone technology. Iran, however, offers exactly what Russia needs and is willing to trade. The economic pressure on Russia is immense. Sanctions have restricted access to global finance, frozen massive state assets, and limited technology imports. Energy revenues, the backbone of the Russian economy, are under constant pressure. Factories struggle to obtain spare parts. Advanced microchips are scarce. Airlines are dismantling aircraft to keep others flying. Every sector feels the strain, but the military industry feels it most of all. In that environment, desperation drives decisions. And desperation is what brought Moscow and Tehran together in one of the most dangerous strategic bargains of the modern era. Seen through this lens, Iran's proposal becomes almost impossible for Moscow to refuse. Tehran can supply the exact weapons Russia urgently requires, and it does so without fear of Western punishment. Iran has lived under sanctions for decades. Additional restrictions barely change the equation. American pressure is nothing new either. Tehran has been pushing back against Washington since the early days of the Islamic Republic. Unlike most countries, Iran is also willing to fuse its production systems with Russia's, openly sharing manufacturing methods and battlefield experience. For the Kremlin, Iran represents survival. And Vladimir Putin appears willing to trade even the most sensitive knowledge in exchange for avoiding defeat in Ukraine or an embarrassing forced compromise. From Tehran's viewpoint, this moment is unprecedented. For years, Iran has existed on the margins of the global system, sanctioned, isolated, and locked out of Western technological networks. Its regional ambitions have constantly been checked by Israeli air power and American military presence. The nuclear program has been a focal point of pressure, disrupted by cyber operations, damaged by airstrikes, and weakened by the killing of key scientists. Iran has spent decades reacting to threats rather than shaping outcomes, struggling to advance its goals while under constant attack. This frustration runs deep. Iranian leaders see themselves as heirs to an ancient civilization, one that once dominated the region politically and culturally. Yet modern Iran has been repeatedly constrained by outside powers. In 1953, the United States and its allies removed Iran's elected government and backed the Shah, whose rule lasted until the 1979 revolution. Soon after, Iran endured a devastating 8-year war with Iraq, during which Iraqi forces used chemical weapons with tacit Western support. Since then, sanctions and isolation have defined Iran's relationship with the world, limiting what its leaders believe should be their rightful regional influence. Within this mindset, the nuclear program is not just about weapons. It is about status and survival. Iranian officials look around and see nuclear-armed neighbors and U.S. bases ringing their borders. They observe the fate of leaders like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, who abandoned weapons programs and were later overthrown. They also see North Korea, economically weak, yet politically untouchable, precisely because it possesses nuclear weapons. The lesson Tehran draws is blunt. Nuclear capability deters intervention. Now Russia is offering a faster route. Not merely advice, but collaboration. Access to experienced weapon scientists, research facilities, and political protection as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. For Iran, this is the partnership it has sought for decades. In return, all it must do is continue supplying drones and missiles that it can produce cheaply using domestic components refined through years of operating under sanctions. The exchange is brutally straightforward and deeply unsettling. Russia gains a steady stream of conventional weapons without rebuilding its own factories from the ground up. Iran gains expertise that could compress its nuclear timeline dramatically. Both nations strengthen their resistance to Western pressure. Both undermine global norms, and the international community is left watching two highly sanctioned states grow more capable together. Yet this alliance is not as solid as it appears. Relationships forged under pressure tend to crack when tested. In June 2025, Israel launched a major series of strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. This was not symbolic. It was a coordinated attempt to delay Iran's nuclear progress and reaffirm Israeli deterrence. As tensions surged and the world braced for escalation, an important detail emerged. Russia withdrew its scientists from Iranian nuclear sites. That decision spoke volumes. Despite years of cooperation and enormous financial commitments, Moscow chose to protect its own personnel, rather than stand shoulder to shoulder with Tehran during a crisis. Russian experts were evacuated even as Iranian infrastructure came under attack. The implication was unmistakable. This partnership has boundaries. The episode exposed the core weakness of the Russia-Iran relationship. It is a marriage of necessity, not trust. Russia relies on Iran for weapons. Iran relies on Russia for nuclear expertise. But neither side is prepared to risk its fundamental interests for the other. When danger becomes real, self-preservation takes precedence. The June 2025 strikes reveal just how transactional and fragile the relationship truly is. History helps explain why. Russia and Iran have competed for influence for centuries. Imperial Russia fought multiple wars against Persia and seized territory that once belonged to it. During the Cold War, Iran aligned with the United States against Soviet expansion. Even after 1979, cooperation remained cautious. Moscow has never fully trusted Iran's revolutionary system, and Tehran has long feared Russian opportunism. That suspicion still shapes the present. Russia worries that a nuclear-capable Iran could destabilize regions where Moscow has interests. Iran fears that Russia might abandon the partnership if reconciliation with the West ever becomes advantageous. Both concerns are grounded in experience, and they limit how deep the alliance can go. Still, cooperation continues. Iranian drones keep targeting Ukraine. Russian specialists continue engaging with Iranian programs. Knowledge keeps moving across borders, not because the relationship is strong, but because both sides feel trapped. Each sees the partnership as necessary to endure pressure and pursue long-term goals. And this brings us to the global consequences. For decades, preventing the spread of nuclear weapons has been central to international security. The logic was simple. Fewer nuclear states meant fewer chances for catastrophe. The Non-Proliferation Treaty created a bargain. States would avoid nuclear weapons in exchange for civilian nuclear access and security assurances. Despite its flaws, the system largely worked. In the 1960s, experts predicted dozens of nuclear-armed states by the end of the century. Instead, only a handful emerged. Some countries reversed course entirely. South Africa dismantled its arsenal. Former Soviet states relinquished inherited weapons. Regional rivals like Brazil and Argentina stepped back from nuclear competition. Even Libya abandoned its program in pursuit of normalization. That fragile success now faces one of its most serious tests. Because if powerful states begin trading nuclear knowledge for battlefield advantage, the logic of non-proliferation begins to unravel, and the world enters far more dangerous territory. This is where the danger becomes existential. Russia and Iran are both signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They publicly committed themselves to preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. And yet, according to Western intelligence assessments, Moscow is now helping Tehran work around the very system both countries promised to uphold, trading sensitive nuclear knowledge for battlefield hardware. This goes far beyond the question of whether Iran might someday acquire a bomb. It strikes at the foundation of the global non-proliferation system itself. If a nuclear power can barter nuclear expertise for drones and missiles, the entire structure begins to collapse. Once that precedent exists, what stops other nuclear states from doing the same? What prevents China from exchanging advanced nuclear technology for political loyalty or military assistance? What keeps future conflicts from turning nuclear knowledge into just another bargaining chip? The rules only work when powerful countries choose to follow them, and Russia is showing what happens when desperation overrides restraint. For decades, nuclear weapons were treated as categorically different from all other arms. Even bitter rivals accepted that certain lines should never be crossed. During the Cold War, Washington and Moscow competed fiercely across the globe, yet they still cooperated on nuclear arms control. They jointly created treaties, enforced restrictions on allies, and shared a basic understanding. More nuclear weapons in more hands made everyone less secure, including themselves. That understanding is now eroding. Russia's actions suggest that under enough pressure, even nuclear taboos become negotiable. Knowledge once guarded as sacred is reduced to a transactional asset. And once that boundary is crossed by a major power, restoring it becomes nearly impossible. Other states will notice. They will conclude that nuclear restraint is optional, something to be observed only when convenient. The consequences would be most immediate in the Middle East. Israel maintains a deliberate ambiguity about its nuclear arsenal, but its deterrent dominance has shaped regional behavior for decades. That balance collapses if Iran becomes nuclear armed. Saudi Arabia has already stated publicly that it would pursue nuclear weapons if Iran crosses that threshold. From there, the logic spreads quickly. Egypt, Turkey, and others would face immense pressure to follow suit. The region would shift from volatile to catastrophically unstable. Saudi Arabia's role is particularly critical. Its leadership has made its position unmistakably clear. An Iranian bomb would trigger an immediate Saudi response. The kingdom has vast financial resources, growing nuclear infrastructure, and deep historical ties to Pakistan, itself a nuclear-armed state. If the Saudis decide to move quickly, there are multiple paths available to them, especially in a world where nuclear taboos are already breaking down. Egypt would not remain on the sidelines. As the most populous Arab state and a traditional regional leader, Cairo would find it politically untenable to remain non-nuclear while rivals acquire deterrence. Egypt once explored nuclear weapons development before choosing conventional military dominance instead. The expertise never fully disappeared. A regional arms race would likely push Egypt to revisit old calculations. Turkey adds yet another layer of uncertainty. As a NATO member, it currently benefits from collective deterrence and hosts allied nuclear assets. But Ankara's relationship with the West has grown more strained in recent years. If Turkey begins to doubt NATO guarantees or feels strategically exposed by nuclear-armed neighbors, it possesses the industrial and scientific capacity to pursue its own deterrent should the political decision be made. And all of this traces back to Ukraine, where the exchange began. Russia's reliance on Iranian drones is not just about tactical advantage. It is symbolic. It sends a message that sanctions can be bypassed, that isolation can be resisted, and that alternative alliances can keep wars going indefinitely. Each drone strike signals a weakening of the post-World War II order and the rise of a more transactional, rules-optional world. For Ukraine, the impact is deeply personal. Nightly air raid sirens, sleepless cities, the constant fear that the next explosion could be closer than the last. Even when most drones are intercepted, the psychological strain accumulates. Russia understands this. The goal is exhaustion as much as destruction. But here is the fundamental imbalance in this exchange. Drones are temporary. They can be shot down, jammed, countered, and eventually rendered obsolete. Production facilities can be targeted, supply chains can be disrupted. Wars end, and with them the utility of specific weapon systems. Nuclear knowledge is different. Once transferred, it cannot be intercepted. It cannot be erased by airstrikes or sanctions. It does not degrade over time. Scientists carry it with them, pass it on, embed it into institutions and education systems. Long after today's war fades into history, that knowledge remains, shaping decisions, capabilities, and risks for generations. This is what makes the strategy so dangerously short-sighted. Russia is addressing an immediate battlefield problem by creating a long-term global security threat. It is trading temporary military relief for a permanent shift in nuclear risk. The benefits are immediate and tactical. The costs are enduring and strategic. From Vladimir Putin's perspective, the logic is brutally narrow. Defeat in Ukraine could threaten his hold on power. Sanctions undermine his economy. Military shortages weaken his leverage. He needs solutions now, not in 10 or 20 years. In that framework, future nuclear instability becomes an abstract problem for future leaders. This mindset is common among authoritarian regimes under existential pressure. When survival is the priority, long-term consequences lose relevance. Strategic patience gives way to tactical necessity. Putin is not calculating what the Middle East might look like decades from now if multiple states acquire nuclear weapons. He is calculating whether Russia can sustain its war next year, and whether he can remain in control. That is the true danger of this moment. Decisions driven by short-term survival are reshaping long-term global security. And once nuclear knowledge is unleashed as currency, there's no easy way to put it back under lock and key. It's also important to acknowledge Iran's official position. Tehran insists it is not pursuing nuclear weapons. Iranian leaders repeatedly state that their nuclear activities are limited to civilian energy production and medical research. They dismiss allegations of missile transfers to Russia as hostile misinformation and argue that their actions fully comply with international law. On paper, they are correct about one thing. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty allows countries to develop civilian nuclear programs under international supervision. But intelligence agencies are not alarmed because Iran wants better electricity generation. They are alarmed because Iranian nuclear experts are interacting with Russian weapons scientists. They're concerned because advanced technical knowledge is being shared in contexts that have nothing to do with power plants. The fear is not about Iran's stated intentions. It's about what Iran could choose to do once it has the expertise, infrastructure, and trained personnel in place. History shows that when political leadership decides to pursue weapons, the civilian-military boundary evaporates quickly. Iran's past behavior fuels these concerns. Secret enrichment sites at Natanz and Fordo were uncovered by intelligence services, not disclosed voluntarily. Uranium was enriched to levels far beyond what is necessary for civilian use. Access for international inspectors was restricted, with unanswered questions about past activities. Meanwhile, Iran developed long-range ballistic missiles designed to carry heavy payloads, systems that make little sense for conventional warfare, but are well suited for nuclear delivery. Taken together, these actions form a pattern that extends well beyond peaceful energy production. That pattern closely resembles the path followed by other nuclear-armed states. India and Pakistan both advanced nuclear programs under civilian justifications. North Korea joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty, received international assistance, then withdrew and built weapons. The strategy is familiar. Develop civilian infrastructure, master the fuel cycle, train experts, and maintain the option to weaponize if leadership deems it necessary. Now add Russian assistance into that equation. Moscow has demonstrated repeatedly that non-proliferation norms are secondary to geopolitical advantage. It has supported sensitive nuclear programs in the past, despite international objections. And in the context of its war in Ukraine, Russia has little incentive to deny Iran access to weapons-relevant expertise when Iran is supplying critical military hardware. This is not a partner inclined to say no. One of the most troubling aspects of this situation is that it is nearly impossible to stop. Nuclear knowledge does not travel in crates or containers. It cannot be intercepted by satellites or blocked at borders. When experts exchange ideas through conversations, training sessions, or technical collaboration, there's nothing tangible to seize. The transfer happens instantly, and once it happens, it cannot be undone. This is precisely what proliferation experts have warned about for decades. Weapons and materials can be tracked, monitored, and destroyed. Knowledge cannot. Once expertise spreads, it embeds itself within institutions, universities, and research centers. It multiplies across generations. No inspection regime can fully contain it. The International Atomic Energy Agency can verify declared materials and inspect facilities, but it cannot measure what scientists have learned. Intelligence agencies can observe meetings and movements, but they cannot know exactly what was taught behind closed doors. This limitation means that once a nuclear power decides to share expertise, the international community has few effective tools to stop or reverse the damage. At the same time, diplomatic efforts continue. The United States and its partners are still attempting to negotiate limits on Iran's nuclear activities. They see caps on enrichment, expanded inspections, and assurances that Iran will not weaponize. But this creates a deeply contradictory reality. Iran negotiates restrictions with Western powers while receiving advanced nuclear assistance from Russia. It becomes a form of diplomatic theater. Publicly, negotiations preserve the appearance of a functioning non-proliferation system. Privately, the system is being bypassed. Western governments expend political capital, offer incentives, and seek compromises, while Russia delivers exactly what Iran wants through parallel channels. The negotiations risk becoming irrelevant before they conclude. This leads to the question that dominates intelligence assessments. How close is Iran to a nuclear weapon, and how much closer does Russian support bring them? Until recently, most estimates placed Iran several years away from a usable nuclear device, even if it chose to pursue one. Enrichment, warhead design, and delivery integration all take time. Russian assistance changes that calculation. Decades of weapons experience can eliminate years of trial and error. Proven designs can replace theoretical models. Failed approaches can be skipped entirely. This is the nightmare scenario for non-proliferation experts, a threshold state receiving expert guidance that allows it to leap forward. Some analysts now warn that if Iran chose to sprint toward a bomb, it could produce enough fissile material in under a year. When breakout time shrinks to months, the ability to prevent weaponization collapses. Diplomatic pressure, inspections, and sanctions all rely on time, and time would no longer exist. At that point, the only remaining barrier would be political choice. And political decisions can change overnight. A regional crisis, a leadership shift, or perceived existential threat could push Iran to act. If that happens, when Iran is already within striking distance of a weapon, the world may have no effective response before a new nuclear state emerges. This is the true cost of the Plutonium deal. The drones attacking Ukrainian cities today are only the opening payment. The long-term bill, an Iranian nuclear weapon, and the potential unraveling of nuclear restraint across the Middle East would shape global security for generations. What began as a desperate wartime exchange risks becoming a permanent transformation of the international order. This is not just a story about Russia and Iran, it is a warning about what happens when short-term survival overrides long-term stability. The consequences are already unfolding, and they will not be easily reversed.